Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Itential webinar. My name is Rich Martin. I'm part of the technical marketing team here at Itential, and our webinar today is going to cover how to create flexible network automations with data parsing and templating features in our platform. More specifically, we're going to cover how to use TextFSM and Jinja2 templates in our platform. And so the first thing I want to show you is really to highlight how we at Itential have integrated these features into our platform. So as many of you know probably, or if you don't know, I'll tell you now, TextFSM and Jinja2 are two different types of templates that are open source and standardized. They're available through all kinds of different programming languages and even some other applications. But they're so incredibly useful that we wanted to integrate those into our platform to help network engineers with their day-to-day automation needs, building automation, parsing through lots of data, and then having to format that data into something maybe more structured, or in a template for easier visibility, easier human readability, those kind of things. So we wanted to use these two really super cool templating features that already exist out in the wild in our platform, but we wanted to make it easier for end users to use these template features. So I want to show you the visual canvas that we have set up for each one of these types of templates to make it super easy to build and to test before you actually use it in a workflow. So we've built a building canvas for these types of templates, and then we've also integrated the ability to run and use these templates inside of an automation workflow as well. So we'll start with the visual canvas for building the templates. I'll show you how we've set it up to provide some example data and then build out the template of your choice. And then to view the results in real time, and then to iterate over that until you have the exact results of the template application that you're looking for that particular use case. In regards, just really as an overview, for TextFSM templates, they take unstructured data as input. And when I say unstructured data, I don't mean like, data that's just jumbled, right? Now, what I actually mean is unstructured data is from the perspective of automation and really from allowing a machine or a platform that could be running a script, a workflow, an automation of some sort to use that data in an easy and efficient way. So one of the things I'll show you today is we'll start our unstructured data from a network show command on a network device. And of course, it's human readable, but if we're only looking for a couple of variables and all of this output, and we need to use that in an automation, which is now how a machine needs to look at it, parse it, query it, those kind of things, we need to take that unstructured data and turn it into a more structured data. And the structured data that we'll be working on today is JSON objects with JSON schemas. So TextFSM generally takes unstructured data as input, and then you create the template rules to parse through that unstructured data and pull things out that you want as output. This allows you to iterate over lots of data in human readable format. It could be difficult human readable format, but nonetheless, the data is there. And we're trying to extract the data that meets certain conditions or certain needs that we may have. And in order to understand TextFSM, you really need to understand the structure and the regular expression rules. And again, because this is a separate open source project, a little Googling will get you right to the spot to where you can look at the documentation and see all the ways you can use this. But it does rely heavily on regular expression rules. Now, in order to show you how this works in our visual canvas, I will step you through building one of these TextFSM and Jinja2 templates so you can see it. But this is by no means a exhaustive class on how to build TextFSM and use regular expression matches. We'll do a very basic one just so you can see how it works, more specifically how it works in our platform. Now on the right-hand side, our other topic of discussion here is Jinja2 templates. So this is a little bit different than TextFSM. This now takes structured data as input. So remember, TextFSM uses unstructured data as input. Jinja2 takes structured data as input. In this case, we're gonna as a source, we're gonna give it a JSON object. And then you can use variables to create and some other programmatic logic to create formatted output. And you get to select the format. It's quite a literal formatted output that you want. And we'll build something to make some human readable data, maybe even a nice text report in our example. But again, you have the ability to extract data that meets certain requirements and certain conditions, even though the data source is from a structured JSON object. And in order to really leverage all the power and capabilities of Jinja2, you have to also know the Jinja2, set of rules and features that it has. So that includes variables, looping, and logical conditions. We will do a little of that today. And hopefully you'll see that even with the little that we do, we're just scratching the surface, but it is super powerful. And if you already have a background in using this, then you hopefully appreciate the simplicity that I'm giving, but we'll focus more on how this works on our platform. So before we move on to the demo, let's just take a quick look at what we'll be doing. Of course, I want you to see how we create a data parsing template using TextFSM. And then the next step to that is how to use that in an automation workflow. So this isn't just a standalone item. We want to be able to build these and not just to use them in our visual canvas to build them, but to actually execute them as part of a more robust network automation inside of a workflow. So we're going to see how we can leverage that in a workflow. We'll do the same thing with Jinja2 template. We'll create one in our builder, and then we'll apply that to a workflow so you can see how that works. And then we're really going to tie it all together, and I think in a really kind of fun way, so that you can see how it all works. And so on the right-hand side is just generally we're going to be in our automation platform, building an automation workflow. But before we get there, we'll be building the templates themselves, the both types of templates. And we will be querying a network device, a Cisco router running iOS, using another part of our platform called Automation Gateway, which has the ability to speak directly to any type of traditional network device in your network. And so let me switch over to screen share, and we can dive into the platform. All right, let me get set up here. And we're going to start in the Itential automation platform. And within the platform, we have different areas, but we're going to spend just about all of our time, not quite all of our time, but just about all of our time in Automation Studio. Automation Studio is where you build workflows that become automations. And we also have a number of different tools and features and functions that are part of the Automation Studio as well. Okay, now that we're in Automation Studio, this is where we build automations, but also in order to build automations, we also need a lot of other tools and features, like I just said. And so one of those features is creating the TextFSM template. So we'll start with that one first. So on the left-hand side here, before we get into workflows, we're going to start with our template area where we have a lot of templates that already exist, but we're going to create a net new one. So if I go here to create, I can choose template. I need to give it a template name. So I'm going to call this webinar. Oops, let me spell it. TextFSM sample. I can give it a group, webinar data parsing. And I can select type, either TextFSM or Jinja2. So if I create, that gets us started. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is our visual builder for TextFSM and Jinja2 templates. On the left-hand side is our unstructured data that's kind of our source. And on the right-hand side, we're going to build out the template line by line. And then down below is where we can visualize the output in real time. So the first thing we need to do is we need to generate some unstructured data so that we can create a template to apply to it. So the easiest way to do that is, ask a network device. So I'm going to go into another area of our Automation Studio called Command Templates. And this is to build a different kind of template for CLI commands. But it gives us one nice advantage here. It gives us the ability to quickly run a CLI command on a network device. So I can type in show interfaces, and then I can pick one of our Cisco iOS devices. This query is our inventory on the system, and so it tells me those that match that host name. On the back end, it's handling all of the connectivity for me. And if I click this test command, it's going to push this command over to the iOS device, and it's going to give back the output from that command. And so here's our unstructured data. If you've been in networking for any amount of time, this is something you're probably already used to looking at. And if you look at them all the time, you can probably find things pretty quickly, just because of rote memorization. But for the rest of us mere mortals, it's hard to find exactly what we want in a quick and easy way. And this is what I mean by unstructured data. There's clearly a structure to it. But if I have to write code or a program or a script or something to iterate through this, it's a lot of extra work. So one of the things that TextFSM does is to help us break this into the data, is parse this data so that we get exactly what we're looking for. So I'm going to take this and copy it. I'm going to go back to our TextFSM builder here. And since this is the source data, I'm going to paste it all in here. I'm going to go back to the very beginning because the command template does give me some extra data that is not part of the raw output from that show interfaces command. And I want to delete that. So now we've got our data. Now we see there's an output here. We've got an error because we really haven't started our TextFSM template yet. So in order to create a TextFSM template, you have to define some variables at the very beginning. I think of these as, what is it that I want to look at? What is it that I want to extract out of this per interface? So this gives me a list of every single interface since I did the show interfaces command. So I want to extract per interface a set of data, right? Something important here that I'm looking for my particular need or use case. So in order to define those variables, you start with typing in value, and then you can type in required if this is something that is obviously required to exist, or not, you can just leave it out. And then the name of the variable, and I'm just going to put it in uppercase to make it easier to write. And now here's where your regular expression knowledge really needs to come into play, because I have to define what this looks like from a regular expression perspective. So, and putting it into parentheses here, I'm going to do \s plus, and so just roughly that means it's in the world of regex, it's a non-white space character is the \s, and the plus means one or more, match one or more. We'll get to all of that as we put this all together, but this is just defining our variables. So the next value I want is going to be, let's get the link status. Right, so that's right here. It's right after the interface name and then the link status. So that would be there. And then that's going to be defined as \w plus, oops. And so in regular expression speak, that is word characters. So your letters, uppercase, lowercase, and numerics. There might be more, but that's what I'm using here. Next one will be MAC address, right? So that exists in this bunch of data. So let's pull that. Now here's where things get a little bit interesting. So \w is like I said, word characters with the plus modifying it to say one or more. We're going to use that because a MAC address is hex, and it's hex values, which are letters and numbers, but it's also separated by periods, right? There's at least in Cisco, it's got 3 sections separated by 2 periods. So, and we can take a look at that right here, right? That's our format for MAC address. So now we have to use regular expression to help define what that looks like. So when the search happens, we can capture it correctly. So we can do it that way. And that should be, the first 4 characters, the next 4 characters, the next 4 characters of the MAC address. Okay. Value. And this is all standardized within TextFSM. This is just us using that standard way of doing this. Next is IP address. Want to pull that out. So we can do \d plus. So that is digits. So \d is digits, and plus means one or more, match one or more. And of course, an IP address is kind of similar, right? We can do, it's separated by dot, like we have a dotted quad notation here. Okay, so we've defined our 4 octets, but we also see that there's a subnet mask, and it would probably be helpful to capture that. So I can put the literal / in and then give it another \d plus to capture that CIDR expression. Okay, and then finally, let's do one more. Let's do MTU, just why not? And that should also be numeric, right? So MTU should be digits as well, one or more. Okay, so now those define the variables or the headers, as we'll see, that we want to extract per interface. Now we need to define a way to start parsing through all of this data. And so to start in TextFSM world, you do start. And as soon as I've done that, you see in the output in real time has now given us 5 columns that we defined up here. Right. So now we're going to start defining how TextFSM, the engine, should parse through this data on the left. So the first thing we should do is look at we want to get the interface. That's actually going to be the very first bit of data up here. So we need to indent. And then again, this is a lot of regular expression. We want to anchor. So this is a new line. This anchors on a new line. And then we want to go reference our variable, right? So the variable that should fit here if we're trying to match this is interface. And we do that by going $, and then in curly braces, the name. So if we do interface, now the next thing we need to match it to extract here is the link status, and that's going to come from here. So now we have to describe in regular expression, this bit of space is space in order to get to the next piece of data that we need. So from interface, we can go \s, which \s allows us to identify white space characters. So this is going to capture that space there. You can put plus for one or more. That's useful just in case it's formatted with multiple spaces. Then we do a literal is, and then we do another \s plus to capture the next piece up to the variable that we want to capture here is up. And then we can identify the variable that and I can actually see how we can pop it up in our builder here. So if you look at that, now it's starting to fill out. It's not completely there yet. We still got some work to go, but we're making progress here. Now we're starting to fill out some information. Let's see how we can continue. We want to do a new line. So you'll notice it starts us off. Go ahead and start this off with a indent because it's in the builder. It identifies we've already indented. We're going to start a new line here. And the next thing we want to get is MAC address. And that comes a little further in the next line, right? This comes way into here. So now we have to identify in regular expression how to kind of skip over this section just to get to what we want to get to in the MAC address. So after the anchor, we can do and the white space because there is some indentation here, right? So we want to skip that white space. So /s plus, and then we can match on hardware, the literal hardware right here. And then we can do kind of a glob wildcard. $* is multiple characters. It's kind of a wildcard. So we can do that until we get to another literal, which is address here. So we can do address. And then we need to match the space is space, which is similar to what we already did up here. So this should look a little similar. So glob address \s plus is \s plus, and now we can define our variable, which is MAC address. Okay, and now we can see at least for one interface it's populated. So let's continue on. Next line is we want to parse for is IP address. So internet address is, and here's our IP address. So that's the next line down. So similar here, \s plus. We can also identify the literal internet. Also use our kind of glob here is, do a space. And in this case, we can go right into our variable IP address. Okay, and so that's filled that out for one of them. And then finally, our MTU starts off similar with an anchor /s plus. Now, since it's at the very beginning, we can parse on MTU, give it another white space, and capture the MTU. Okay, so that's done that. Now, we've defined an entire record, right? So in order to kind of finish out the parsing for this one record, we end it with record. And so once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and save it. Once I've done that, you can see it's immediately rendered out all of the data that's important to us. So now at a glance, we've taken, so if we look here, we've got several different interfaces that occur in all of this data. For our use case, we were really only interested in link state, MAC address, IP address, MTU. We defined those values. We created the parsing rules using regular expression matches. And now we've structured that data. And that structured data is being displayed to us here in the output in a table so that we can easily see it and recognize it. When we use it in a workflow, that structured data will actually be represented as a JSON object, which makes it, again, easier for a machine to query and extract and manipulate and those kind of things. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. But this is the result. So we made it really easy to paste some example data into here. As we go on the right-hand side, building our TextFSM templates line by line, bit by bit, getting the output of everything so we can iterate and test and check as much as possible until we finally finished the format in the template to get the full output. And this looks good. And some of the things that may be interesting here as well. Well, we have a lot of interfaces with no IP address. Well, is that normal? Did we mess something up here? Well, let's take a look. Gigabit Ethernet 1.7. So here's our data that we pasted in. Let's see, the IP address would occur after the description. Here's the description. Sure enough, there's no assigned IP address. So you can use that to validate that everything in your parsing rules are correct here. So that's pretty cool. So we saved that. I know we saved that. I'll save it one more time. So where do we go from here? Let's now transition over to creating a workflow that actually uses this, because again, we're just building it here. Now we want to actually use it in an automation. So let me do a duplicate here. And I'm back into Automation Studio. We were in this section building a template. Now we can go into this section, which is creating a workflow. And I can create a new workflow. And we'll call this workflow webinar TextFSM example. When I create a new workflow, it's going to put us on this workflow canvas, which is kind of a drag and drop low-code canvas that you can use to build. So again, everything you do in this platform is built to help network engineers and really anybody who wants to build automations quickly using canvases and builders and things like that, just to make it easy. And even if you are very familiar with TextFSM and Jinja2, having a way to quickly build and iterate and test in real time without having to run any kind of code over and over again does make it easy. And it's about using tools that make the process faster and easier. So we're trying to allow folks that may not have that kind of background to be able to participate in network automations and make automations that can be automation components that can be used in workflows. So here we are on the canvas. If on the left-hand side, these are a lot of the features that are in the system, templates being one of them. On the right-hand side are integrations to not only network controllers, network devices, all kinds of IT systems, sources of truth, all those things. We have a really flexible way of doing integrations into pretty much anything in your ecosystem. For our purposes, we want to render this, or we want to apply this template, right? So I can do a quick search, apply template here. It's going to tell me, okay, in your template builder, which is the section that we've been in, I have some calls to apply template. If I click here, it'll drop a task. We call this a task. Anything on here is a task in the canvas called apply template to text. This is where we can leverage the template we just built, okay? So we need to first provide it some. So when I double click on it, it's going to give me some variables. And obviously we need to tell it some things in order for it to run this particular task. One of them is the text to parse, right? So in the example that I created here, I pasted in the text to parse here, and then we built the template. But when you're in the workflow, you want to get that data live from a network device. So that's what we're going to do. I'm not going to paste any data here. We're going to pull that directly from a Cisco device. In fact, the same Cisco device that we just queried earlier to get that example data. And then I need to tell it which template I want to use. And this is the name of the template that we created over here. So in this case, it's webinar TextFSM example. So I could just copy that and paste it here. Now, until we get some other tasks built on the workflow canvas, I can't fill this out, but we can just save it right there. So I just said, let's grab something from a Cisco device. So we can grab another task here, again, on the right-hand side, and I can leverage some other tasks that we have to make a call into a Cisco device, that same Cisco device. So I'm going to put that a little further here, and then I'm going to double-click that and open the variables here. So we've got, a summary here. It's always good to change that to be a little more descriptive. So we can say run show interfaces on Cisco router. Okay. So these are some variables we have to fill out. So in order for this to run, if this is going to push a command to a Cisco router and give us back the input, it's an automation. We've got to tell it a couple of things, right? So the first thing we have to do is tell it, like, what device do I want to use, right? So in this case, you could be an IP address or something like that, because we have like an inventory system that understands exactly where something is. We can identify it by name. So in this case, we can use the name of the device that's allocated to it in the system. In this case, this is the one we used earlier in the command template to grab that data. So this is iOS CSR AWS 1. That's the name of the device. Now, one of the things when you're filling out these variables is you have to know it's expecting a certain data type here. So what I've given it is a string. What it really wants is an array, because this particular task can run the same command or even multiple commands across multiple different hosts, different routers, if you will. So in this case, I'm creating an array, which is encapsulating it in these square brackets. And so, and just giving it a single device name. So this is the device we're going to run on. Commands, similarly, we want to express this also as an array, because that's what it's asking for. And we just give it the CLI command, show interfaces. And that's all we need. So now we can create some transitions. So if I go start, the first step is to run this command. When this command runs, it's going to have a set of structured data coming out of it. It's going to be formatted in a JSON object that can now be used in other subsequent tasks. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up here. So that's going to be our last step before the end. But what you'll find as you're building network automations, even if you're doing it in in a programming language, is if you make a call to a device and you say, hey, if you ask it for some amount of information, it's going to return that information typically in a structured way, and you're going to have to parse that information out and maybe even manipulate it some in order to fit the format for the next call and the next step, right? So for example, I might like in this example, I'm going to pull this data out of of that Cisco iOS device. I'm going to do a show interfaces, but it's going to come back in structured data. And one section of that structured data in that JSON object is the one thing I'm looking at. You're going to see a lot of other information in there in regards to that call, but I'm really just looking for that one particular thing. And what that thing is the standard output, which is just the raw data that came back from show interfaces, just like you'd see it on a CLI. So in order to do that, I can't link it directly to here. And then I need to do a intermediate step to extract that data. And an easy way to do it, especially if the data is already in the right format that you need it for, you just need to extract something out, is to use a query call. So a query call or a query task is an operation that allows us to now take the data out of here, extract it through a query operation, and then present it to the TextFSM template. So if I create some transition lines here, this allows my query to now understand that this is a previous task, and he's going to have the information about the data that he's going to output in this previous task. So if I click this query, it's going to give us some information, and we can call this get standard out from. All right, the query here, and I'm going to paste this in, and I'm going to go through it because it'll make more sense when we see the data run. But this is a JSON query, and I'm querying something called completed with an index array of 0, something called response with an index array of 0, results, and standard out. It'll make sense in a minute once we run this. And then I need to tell it what is the object that I want to query from. What is the data set, the JSON object that I want to query from? So if I click this down box here, now since we have a transition line to the iOS command, that tells us that this run show interfaces on Cisco router, which is the iOS command that's going to execute the command on that Cisco router, I'm going to use that task's output as the input here. So that task outputs something, a variable called standard out. That's going to be a JSON object that we're going to use for our query here. So now when that query is completed, it's going to have the data output that we need to finally feed into our template here. So now I can fill this piece out, which is the text that we're going to apply this template to. So now if I click here, what's the reference for the variable? It's going to be get the standard out from the Cisco call. That's the query I just did. And it's going to use its return data. That's going to be the input for here. That's exactly what we need. Okay, so we've dropped all of those tasks onto the canvas here. I've saved it, and we can give it a test run. Oops. Let's go ahead and let it save. And then we can give it a test run. And when we give it a test run, we're going to be able to look at it as a job. So right now it's just a workflow. When I click the run button and click start, it's going to create a job. That's the running version of this workflow. And we can watch the workflow in action. It's actually already completed. You can kind of see here the status on the bottom. When a task completes, it updates was complete. Of course, everything here is pretty quick. The first thing that happened was we ran the show interfaces on the Cisco router. If I double click that, we can look, let me expand this out a bit. We can look for the incoming and outgoing variables. So the incoming variables, we fed it. That's when I double clicked that and I added the host and the command. So these are the host, and that's the host and command that I double click and statically added. Now let's take a look at the outgoing. So the outgoing is the data that is the response after this is run. So after that has run, I told you this has a ton of data in it, right? And that query is going to query out just the particular data we need to pass to the TextFSM template. So this is why structured data is so important. There's a lot of data here. In fact, every line of the output of that command, that show interfaces command, is here, along with all kinds of metadata for status and things like that. What we really want is just one particular section of that. And when the data is structured this way, especially in a JSON object, we can identify these keys here to pinpoint exactly the data we want. So let's take a peek at this query, and we'll come back to this. Because on the query, if you'll remember, the value that I typed in that I said would make sense later, completed, response, results, standard out. So now let me go back to here, and let's go back to the outgoing, because remember, the outgoing now, this outgoing data has become the incoming data for this particular query. So let me switch the view here. Completed. I said, hey, let's look at completed, and then this is an array. You see with this bracket, this is an array. So I had a 0 in here for the query. So I wanted element 0. That's the first element. Then we had response, again, another array. I wanted element 0, the first element there. So we go down in the tree, results. So results is under the response section. So I wanted results. This is a bracket. So this means it's a brace. This means it's an object that follows. And then I'm going to minimize this. The next part was standard out, std out. And this is an array, and I signified the first element of this array as well. So I said, I want this data right here. This is the raw data that we needed as the input to our TextFSM template. And see, this is why having JSON objects and other types of structured data is really, really important. It helps to get to the data you want quickly and efficiently, along with other things, being able to iterate, those kind of things. So that's what the query did. It pulled that data out. Now, if I go back to the query and we take a look at the outgoing data, that's the data that extracted, right? This is the return data string that's extracted. And now that becomes the input for our TextFSM. Here's our TextFSM input. So this is the data that was passed from the query that was extracted from this. And then the outgoing is the final result. And here's our final result. Now, what's interesting is I told you earlier that when the TextFSM template is executed in a workflow, it becomes structured data. We looked at it as a table when we were building it in the builder, the TextFSM builder. But when we actually run it in a workflow, it has now structured it in such a way into a JSON object that we can use and iterate programmatically, right? So the things that are really interesting here are, here's the variables that we defined: interface, link status, MAC address, IP address, MTU rather. And then here's a variable, an array that has all of our interfaces with those names tagged with their particular headers. And we'll use this in a moment, going all the way down for every interface. So now we've just structured all that, and now we can use it programmatically in a workflow. So that's how you apply a workflow. And of course, there's other things here. There's an unmapped version of the same data that doesn't have the tagging for each one of those sections. And that gives you flexibility in how you want to use this inside of another program or an automation or a workflow or whatever it is you're using the structured data with. So in our case, we could build workflows that leverage this, but we can also use other automation elements and assets. And I'm going to show you another one now. So let's move back to our example TextFSM here. So we can shift over to building the other topic of discussion, which is the Jinja template. So I'm going to go and create a new template, similar to what we did before. I'm going to call this, let's see, webinar Jinja2 example. A group, I'm going to call it webinar parsing. Whoops. And then set up TextFSM. Obviously, we want Jinja2 this time. And I'm going to create that. Okay, this looks really, really similar to the builder for TextFSM. And there's a reason, because this is a great way to build. So a little bit different. So the structure of Jinja2, again, that's a standard, and we're going to just cover some basics here, but I want to show you the flexibility and especially how this works in our platform. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we need some sample data. In this case, it's not unstructured data. We need structured data. So where can we get some structured data from? Well, we just created structured data by parsing through that interface list with our TextFSM template, right? So I can literally go in here and copy this from, this is the job, we watch the job, and I can see all the data in and out. So the ultimate output of this is the structured data. So let's just use that since we already have it. So in here, I can paste it in, and now we have our structured data, right? Okay, so on the right-hand side, let's figure out how to use Jinja2, at least a rudimentary use of Jinja2. This starts off as it's a lot different than TextFSM because this is using structured data, but this allows us to be a little more literal in our template ability, right? So if I do something like this, watch the output. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Don't want to mess up our source here. This is the value of the headers key. I'm literally typing it in and it's literally giving me the output. So how do I access, so let me go back to the top. How do I access this particular key, which is really, you can think of it as a variable that holds this data, this list of the variables that we defined in our TextFSM. Well, in Jinja2, everything starts off as, well, I need to, everything starts off with curly braces. And if you want to identify from your source data, identify a variable in the JSON object or a key, you can specify it. But notice now, this is, since we've got the color coding to identify in the builder that this is part of the Jinja template, not just part of the literal text part of the template, but now we're doing some Jinja operations here. Now it's saying, okay, replace the key and headers from our JSON object with whatever its value is. And in this case, it gave us literally the entire array because that's what I asked for. You can also do this. This is the value of the first header variable and specify something a little more, well, specifically. Headers. Parse out the next one, right? So headers is the full thing. And then headers 0, which is the first element in the array, gives me interface. Headers 1 is the second element in the array, which is link status. And we could go on and on. So you can see how you can reference variables in the Jinja template and how we render them down here in real time so that you can see and iterate very quickly. Jinja2 templates also gives you the ability to iterate over a group or an array of values. So when we looked at our mapped here, notice that that's an array. And so there's a list of like elements in the array. And in this case, it's all the data we parsed out interface by interface. So with Jinja2, we can parse through that inside the template. And we can do that in our builder in real time. So instead of just a variable is using 2 of these, we want to start this with an operation or a command. In this case, it's going to be a for loop with a curly brace %. And then we'll end it with a % curly brace as well to end the statement. But I'm going to do a for loop. So this is an iteration loop over this list of arrays. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define a variable or an identifier for this, for every record in this. And this could be named anything. And then so now I need to tell it which variable or which array to iterate over. In this case, we'll just use the name mapped, right? Because it's right there. End it with this. Okay, so then we need to also have an end for, so we need to tell it when the end of this loop happens. And now we can start to define, use the data inside each one of these iterations. And we can do that by doing this. So I'm referencing the variable that I created, and now I'm going to reference the key value inside here. So if I say interface, you'll notice, boom, our output immediately gave us, because this is iterating over every single one of the elements in the mapped array, it gave us a list of all the interfaces. Well, that's pretty cool. Now we can start to format this into something more human readable. So notice I hit enter here, and it actually spaced out between that's the literal part of, the Jinja2 template. If you hit enter, that's going to be part of that template. But we can then do something like, okay, let's make this a little more human readable. Link is record.status. Okay, link is up. And we do something like MAC address, this human readable. So now we're formatting this into something that is easier to look at than perhaps that huge lines of, strings of data that came from a show interfaces. In this case, MAC address. And I'm just going line by line into each one of these. Say primary IP is record.IP address. Keep going. MTU is there we go. And make it pretty a little bit. Let's put another enter between the two. There we go. Now the output shows us in real time, wow, this is looking a lot more readable. So this Jinja template is now taking the structured data and not just pulling the variables out, but iterating over it. And in real time, I can see what my output looks like. And that's really, really nice. But one of the things that kind of bothers me is, some of these don't have IP addresses. We saw that when we were generating the text FSP, FSM rather, like some of these don't have IP addresses. And maybe we want to call that out. So how do we do that here? Maybe we can do something different when the IP address is not there, right? And we can with TextFSM. There's some abilities to do conditionals here. So we can do an if statement, right? If the record IP address, and we can tell it not equal to null. So that means it has something in it. And we can print this. And then, of course, we always do need to specify do a special thing here. End if to this, just like we did in N4. So that tells the template engine, yeah, you finished that if statement there. Okay, so now what we've done is we said, well, if it's not equal to blank, then print the primary IP. So there are still things here. So now we don't have the primary IP as blank. Those fields are skipped if that particular interface doesn't have a primary IP. But we can actually go one step further and say, well, maybe we don't want to skip them. Maybe we want to call them out if they're null, because maybe they should have an IP address in them. So then we can add another statement into here, an else statement. And then we could do something like this, and we can add call out somehow. Primary IP is not assigned. How about that? How about instead of a dash, we do a star? Okay, let me save that. Okay. And let's see. Yep, here we go. We've got an update on our output here. So now you can see with our else statement, primary IP is not assigned if there's no IP. So that just helps us call things out. And now you can see how having structured data that we've generated from TextFSM has now helped us to iterate in a Jinja2 template. So this is powerful, but more importantly, how quickly we were able to do it in this visual build canvas. Okay, so given that, now let's go back to Automation Studio. Duplicate that here, and let's create a workflow that can leverage this. And I'll just show you what this looks like, and then we'll bring it all together. So I'll create a workflow. I'm going to call this webinar to example. Create. Back to our canvas again, and we want to keep this super simple. So I'm just going to show you the call that we would use to render the Jinja template. That's literally rendered Jinja template. So again, this is part of our template builder. This is the section we were at when we were building that. And we can just take a quick look at how it works. And in this case, I will statically assign these things. So I'm going to double click that task. It's going to say, hey, we need a couple of variables here. This should make total sense. We need the name of the template. Okay, we can handle that. Here's our Jinja2 template. Here's our name that we assigned for it. And then we need the context, which is the actual object that it's going to use to parse through, extract variables, those kind of things. Again, we're going to show you in a minute where this comes from another task, but in this case, we can just simply copy here to test it in the workflow. So I can literally test that entire entire JSON object into here. So save it. I'm going to save it here. And then when we run it, again, it's going to take us to job. It's going to create a job. It's going to take us to the job manager where we can see it run. Obviously, it's a single step, so it's complete. But the thing we want to look at here is to take a look at the data itself. So the object that we pasted in was the JSON object that we've been using in the build canvas. We referenced the actual name of the template that we created in the platform. And then the outgoing data here is kind of hard to see. Let me switch it over here. The outgoing data is that rendered text format rendered Jinja2 output from the Jinja2 template that we created. You'll notice that has a lot of /n's in it. Those are new lines. If this were to be copied and pasted into a notepad or a text file and viewed, it's formatted that way. That's why it looks different here, because we're showing it as variables and not formatted in a text way. But this is all the data in the format that we created. So that's how you render the Jinja2 template in a workflow. Now let's just bring it all together, since we kind of created a circuit here. What if we go back to our original TextFSM example, right? So we ran an iOS command, got the raw data from that, queried the JSON object just so we can get the raw data out, fed it to our TextFSM template. Our TextFSM template gave us the output of structured JSON data. And now we could actually render that same Jinja template here. Just like we did last time. And feed the data from this template into this template. So we can do that. So we do need the name of our text, our Jinja template, which is webinar Jinja2 example. Okay. And instead of pasting data in here, we can reference the data from the previous call. So that's apply a template to text. That's the parsed out data. So that's this right here. Apply this template. It's going to go into here. So this is applying the TextFSM template. The output is going to be structured data. We're going to give to our Jinja template. That's going to turn it back into something nice and readable for us. And I'm going to put one more task on here. I'm going to say view data, which is just a manual task. It'll stop the automation when it hits this blue task and allow us to view some information. And then we define the information here. So I could say, this is view data. I could say view Jinja2 template output. And then in the body of the message, I can tell it to use the output of the Jinja2 rendered template. So we'll do that. All right, so run a command on the iOS, show interfaces on the iOS device, extract the data out, feed it to our TextFSM template that we created, going from unstructured to now structured data, passing it to our Jinja2 template, which uses structured data, JSON data as its format, and then rendering it into something nice and human readable, giving us the things we were really looking for out of that output. And then we'll just stop here and view it real quick. And that's the gist of this. So let's run it. Let's create a job. Let's view the job. All right, executing the command, going to here, doing the Jinja2 template. Now it stopped at view data, like I said it would. It's just like a task like any other, so we can always view the variables, but we can also go here and work this. This will progress it along. and this will show us the data. Okay, this isn't exactly, again, so think about what we're viewing here. We're viewing, this was originally rendered through the Jinja template in a text format, right? That's why you see all the new lines. But this is precisely what we designed the template to do. But since we're viewing it inside of a web browser, basically, it's not being rendered in a pretty enough format, right? In fact, in web browsers, it doesn't understand new line characters. It understands different characters for line breaks. And so what I want to do is give you just one more bonus way of doing some parsing. And let's parse this text formatted output that came from the Jinja2 into something that looks better now, rendered specifically for an HTML browser, which is what we're looking at here, right? So let's do one more modification to our workflow, and then we'll run it again. And this is kind of a bonus way. You know, we talked about TextFSM, we talked about Jinja templates. One of the things that we've done other webinars on is transformations. They're super powerful. They allow you to do the same kind of things that I've showed you how to do inside of the template builder for these two types of templates, but it actually does a lot more. It's kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of this. These templates are great for people who already know them and can use them, or just getting started. Your networking team, if they can start building these templates, you can see how quickly in our platform, we integrate them not just into the builder, but into a workflow as well. And so they can be used even as reusable assets for different network automations. But we also use transformations because they can allow you to do so many more powerful things. And in this case, one of the things I want to do is I want to take all the new lines out of that Jinja2 template we rendered and turn them into HTML break tags. So it looks nicer now that we're formatting here. So this is kind of a bonus way to do it. And we'll do this one really quickly. We won't get too involved. We've got other webinars that show this, but this is a transformation. Transformations are here, and I can create a new transformation if I wanted to, and it would appear here when I created it, but I've already pre-created it. But it's very similar in the way we've already done these things. We've created these templates, and now they're usable on the canvas under a specific task. So you can create a transformation and then use this task to make it presented and executable here. So here's what this transformation I'm going to use looks like. It's going to take the input that we've defined from the Jinja2 template, right? There was a string called render template that had all of that data with all the new lines and all of that we had created. That was the output of the Jinja template we created. I'm going to map that. So this is what makes the transformation so powerful is I have all these methods and functions that we can create that are available to us. And in this case, I just want to replace all the new line characters with this tag right here, which is an HTML break, which will now format that a lot nicer when we view it in our view data task. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying take this string when it's provided in the workflow, apply this pattern to it. Notice this is our friend regular expression match. Anything that has the \n, which is a new line, you need to replace. That's a global replace with the G. And here's the replacement, this tag right here. And then as the output, we're going to output another string, which is formatted specifically for HTML. You could even have multiple of these types of methods to format it for different things. In fact, some of our workflows that we use as demonstrations or we help customers with can format a single message for Slack, for ServiceNow, for email, using these transformations. And that's what makes them so powerful. But I wanted to show you that because I wanted to give you one more step of using templates and data parsing using transformations. Okay, so that's what that looks like. So now we need to make a couple of adjustments to our workflow here. The first thing is, since I added this transformation, I need to reference that transformation that I just showed you. So I reference it by name. And now it's going to say, okay, you need to feed some information, some data here from the Jinja2 template. And so here is the task previous to this one, render Jinja2 template. And that's where our data is going to come from. So then it's going to operate on that data and give us that replacing the new lines with HTML tags for breaks. So I can save that there. And the last piece here is now that I've created that transformation, this view data, it had originally it had the output from the Jinja template rendering, but now I want to, because that's being manipulated through the transformation, now I want to reference the transformation, and it's formatted for HTML output. Because remember, when it's done, it defined the variable formatted for HTML, and that's what I'm referencing here, formatted for HTML. Okay, let's give that a save. Now let's hit run, and we should see very similar to what we saw before. It's going to run through everything. It's going to get to our view data task here. This is, again, a manual task that we put in here just so I can stop it. And if I work the task, it's going to render based off of what the transformation did for us. And what the transformation did for us was replace every new line with an HTML break, which is now formatted nicely for this particular view, which is through a web browser. And you'll see this is the culmination of everything we've done in this demonstration and webinar. We started with a Cisco iOS show interfaces. We parsed, we extracted what we needed from the standard output from that task. We fed it into the TextFSM template that we created and now executed based off of that data. That parsed out everything we wanted, but that was represented in a JSON object, which is now structured. So we went from unstructured to structured. And then we wanted to restructure it in a Jinja template so that it would look nice in a text file for maybe a text report. And now, because we want to view it in another application, I showed you how to use a transformation to do a simple tidy up on it and remove the new lines and put breaks in here. So now when we view it through the view data task in our platform, it represents what it'll look like inside of a text file as well. And so you can see it has all of our variables and our assignments and the things we did the for loop and the if statements and the TextFSM. All of that's represented here. So that's the end of the demonstration. Hopefully that gave you a good idea of how to leverage all of these assets inside of the automation platform. Again, if you have any questions or if you would like to reach out to us for more information, feel free to do so. And I just want to say thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to with you again.